Okay, well, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at the conference. As Pat says, I've been leading the Big Data project at the ONS for the last 18 months. And my presentation today is going to cover some of the work we've been doing at the ONS, but also across the GSS, the Government Statistical Service, about the benefits that big data can bring to policy making through the development and enhancement of official statistics that underpin those policies. But also I'm going to demonstrate some of the statistical challenges that we've come across through this work and how we started to manage those statistical challenges. Okay, just to start off with a little bit of context. For those of you that don't know, the Government Statistical Service, or GSS, is a community of all civil servants working in the collection, production and communication of official statistics, spread across most of the UK government departments and also the devolved administrations. The GSS collects, analyses and disseminates official statistics in order to meet the needs of government, the public and business. And we produce statistics on a wide variety of subjects: the economy, tax, health, migration, environment. And they're all used to underpin government policy making, resource allocation and planning. So official statistics have traditionally been based on surveys, census and administrative data. But as the title of this session suggests, there's a new type of data around, that we can call and consider to be big data. Now there's a huge variety of different definitions and nobody can agree on what really big data is. What I've got on the slide there is one that's been adopted within the international statistical community, particularly across national statistical organisations. So for me it's about new types of data, so it's not survey, it's not census and it's not administrative data. And it's data that, due to their size or the speed that they've been collected or their structure, that they're actually challenging our traditional systems and our approaches. Now within the ONS Big Data team, we've been focused on this new type of data sources. We've also been focused on the methods and the technologies and the techniques that we need to use to analyse these new data sources. Okay. So this slide provides some examples of how these new data sources and new approaches are being used within official statistics. In some cases they may still be at a research phase, but the examples demonstrate how big data and data science can improve the quality of the statistics, or perhaps allow us to produce more timely or more frequent statistics that can potentially improve policy making. Now at the ONS we have been developing web scrapers to automatically collect price data from supermarket websites on a daily basis. This allows us to collect richer, more frequent and also cheaper data to our current collection methods of actually physically visiting stores. This allows us to investigate price distributions, to produce weekly and potentially even daily indices rather than monthly indices that can support our economic policies. And if you did go to the previous session on prices, you'll have heard Chris Payne speak about this work. Chris is from the Prices Division at the ONS. The next example is at BIS, the Department of Business Innovation and Skills, where they've been investigating how to use LinkedIn data to supplement their traditional surveys to provide data on, particularly they've focused on computer science graduates, the types of roles they take on, the skills profile and the level of seniority, the types of roles that they go into. The next example is from HMRC, where their analysts have access to petabytes of data relating to tax and national insurance, both on a personal and business side. And they're using new data analytical approaches to track over £500 billion worth of tax payments and produce forecasts that underpin tax policy. And the final example is from ONS again, where we've undertaken research and developed methods for analysing geolocated tweets, applying clustering approaches to infer place of residence, and by monitoring over these time, identifying movements of the population. For example, we particularly focus on movements of students into and out of university times around sort of term time. And these are just a few of the examples that can show what the potential of big data has to improve official statistics. But through this work, we've also become aware of lots of challenges that relate to using big data in official statistics. And there are lots of challenges: ethical challenges, commercial issues, issues around skills and capability, challenges around sort of the technologies we need to handle and analyse these data. And we're addressing all of these within our team and within our project. But what I'm going to particularly focus on today is some of the statistical challenges that we've come across. What one needs to be mindful of when analysing and using these new big data sources. So through some real examples of work that we've done, I'm going to highlight some of the potential pitfalls, but also how we're trying to address them. So kind of as the title of the session suggests, the challenges of using these large non-random data sets. Okay, so the first example I want to share with you relates to data quality. And this is from some of the work that we've been doing at the ONS looking at Twitter. Now, traditionally, official statistics are based on data sources that we control. So things like surveys that we design ourselves. We therefore know all the details of how the data have been collected and processed since we've been involved in all of these steps. But with big data, we often know little about the quality of the data, how it's been produced, and it's very unlikely that we'll have any control over any of these processes. Now, this chart was produced during our work, as I say, at ONS investigating Twitter as a data source to provide intelligence on population movements. And it's a very simple chart of the daily volumes of geolocated tweets over an 11-week period. And it's broken down by device type. So if you note, there's actually a general drop in the daily volume of tweets around mid-September. There's a bit of a drop from about 400,000 to 300,000 tweets. That's on a daily basis. And as you can also see, this is mostly attributed to a drop in tweets made by people using their iPhones. And we did a bit of digging and actually discovered this coincided with Apple releasing their new iOS 8 operating system. And this operating system incorporated more flexible options for users around kind of their privacy settings. So it had a massive impact on the number of people using iPhones and the tweeting and whether they had their geolocation switched on. Now, this wasn't documented anywhere else. This is exactly what my team found just by doing a bit of digging, looking at things on the internet, having a think about this data source. And that's a real issue with this type of data. Big data sources like Twitter are not controlled, their quality isn't constant, their composition is changing against kind of social, commercial and technological changes. They aren't designed for statistical purposes. This means that if you're kind of using them over time, like we were trying to look at movements of people, you've got to really understand what the data is telling you and try and you've got to think about what these confounding factors might be. So you need to understand and explore the data in as much detail and also do that continually over time, because you really never know when something like this might impact on your data source. Okay, so another issue that we discovered around data quality that we encountered through some of our pilot work at the ONS is around misclassification when we were web scraping price data to feed through to our economic indicators. So we've set up these web scrapers and they collect all items under a supermarket's item classification. So for example, the scraper will navigate to, bread on the website and collect all the price items under this classification. Unfortunately, supermarkets frequently put things that aren't bread under those classifications. For example, they'll throw pastries under what they're calling bread, which is fine, that's absolutely fine, they can do that, but it mucks up our prices when we want to collect just bread. So, the two charts on the slide show some density plots for price distributions of those items that were classified as whiskey and those items that were classified as onions, and the different colours are just 3 different months. So all the prices that when the web scrapers went in and collected prices of whiskey, or they collected prices of onions. Now you can see for whiskey there's a very distinct bimodal distribution. With some analysis of the underlying data and a little bit of knowledge about whiskey in our team, we recognise that this is actually a true reflection of the price distribution. Any takers for what the 2 peaks are?
Single malt and blended.
Absolutely right. Single malt and blended whiskey. So that's a true reflection of the whiskey price distribution. But for onions, where you've got this peak around £8 per kilos, We did some looking at the data, and actually this isn't a reflection of price distribution of onions. There isn't a kind of high-level onion, but actually it's leeks being classified as onions. So it's like the previous example. One needs to explore and understand the underlying big data that we're using to underpin our statistics. But for this research, we had to do it across hundreds of categories. We couldn't just rely on kind of producing a plot and having a look and having a think about distributions. We needed a systematic and scalable solution to identify but also correct for this misclassification. So what we've been doing is developing machine learning techniques to deal with the problem, whereby our algorithms learns from a manually classified training data set to predict an item's category based on its text description, and then we can apply those algorithms to the larger real data set. So that's a problem with the data, but we're looking at these new techniques to try and overcome it. Okay, the next example. Another kind of key statistical challenge when using big data, and it's often exaggerated within big data sources, is sample bias. So not being fooled that sort of bigger is better. If the sample is biased and it misrepresents the population that you're trying to understand, or you're trying to measure, then your results could potentially be misleading. And often with big data sources, we don't even know who's representing the data. Take, for example, sort of social media sites. And this slide shows some statistics about the age and gender demographics of users of different social media sites. So if you're using Facebook to produce some kind of statistics or sentiment analysis, you've got to know that you've got 88% of 16 to 24-year-olds, but only 74% of over 65s. And that is actually a percentage out of just social media users, not the population at whole. And that's just the discrepancies by age and gender. It's been well documented, and actually use of social media sites depends on your education, socioeconomic background, etc. And to make it even more difficult, these trends are changing over time. So apparently 5 years ago, Facebook was the place to be if you were kind of in your teens. Then all the parents of teenagers went on Facebook because they wanted to know what the teenagers were up to. And now teenagers don't go on Facebook. They go on something else that the parents don't know about. So it continually changes all the time. Now, we're very aware of these issues at the ONS, and within our work on Twitter, we're also doing some work on mobile phone data, which is exactly the same problem about kind of bias. And we're investigating and trying to develop methods to try and measure, but also adjust for this sample bias. Okay, and my final example is kind of final word of warning I want to illustrate, is around kind of correlation and causation, which I think has been well documented. Just as we see patterns in the data, we can't always leap to conclusions. You need to understand the model and the theory behind the pattern. This slide shows some really early work that we undertook to look at Google Trends. So this is volumes of internet search queries, and we were looking at it as a predictor of migration. So the hypothesis was that new immigrants coming into the country would undertake internet searches in their first language, and therefore would the pattern of search volumes relate to patterns of migration. So as the slide shows results focused on Polish nationals, and the blue line is labour force survey estimates, so the official statistic estimates of those reporting Polish nationality over the period 2004 to 2010. And the red line is the Google search volume term for the index for the term Polski, which is Polish in Polish. As you can see, the two are quite strongly follow each other, the patterns follow each other. However, results for other nationalities were not as good, particularly those nationalities with established and stable migrant populations. So the Google search results seem to be good at picking up changes, particularly sort of sudden changes. But we can't be sure what's influencing these search volumes, what we're seeing, and what might impact them in the future. In fact, we had a discussion recently about actually, if you're just using a particular term like Polski, what happens is, I don't know, a film comes out called Polski, or a pop group becomes suddenly popular, then suddenly what you're measuring in the search volume is nothing to do with migration. It's a totally different phenomenon. And it's very similar to the Google flu example that has been very well documented, that a lot of people are aware of, that was seen as a very early kind of indication of the power of big data, which has more recently fallen apart. So I'm not saying that these types of results aren't useful. Often they'll be available much earlier than official numbers, but they need to be used with caution. So perhaps rather than using as official estimates, they can be used as a trend indicator or an early warning, or be used alongside or to complement our traditional and official statistics. So, sort of as concluding remarks, I think hopefully I've illustrated some of the statistical challenges that one needs to be aware of when using big data sources, and through our work across at the ONS and across the GSS, we're understanding what these issues are and trying to manage them. So I think the way that we do that is to firstly understand and explore the data as much as you can, get as much information as you can about the quality of the data, any anomalies, how the data can and can't be used. Understand who is represented in the data and if it's biased, adjust for that bias, and that's what we're trying to do at ONS, investigating how we can develop methods for doing this for Twitter and mobile phone data. New data sources may require new methods and approaches, like some of the machine learning algorithms we're using for the misclassification of prices, but we shouldn't forget the traditional statistical and analytical approaches, which is why I think it's important statisticians and analysts are involved in this type of work. And that leads me on to my next bullet point, which is around collaborative working. This is a new field, a new area for a lot of different fields. And therefore, what we've been trying to do at the ONS is work across different disciplines. So we've built up relationships with other government departments who are doing work on big data and data science. We've got links with other national statistics institutes internationally, and we've developed partnerships with academics and also within the private sector to try and learn from each other and develop expertise together. And finally, one needs to ensure that statistics are produced, or the intelligence that we gather from the big data is fit for purpose. They may not be of sufficient quality to produce an official estimate, but they may provide this early indicator or a trend or complement or be used alongside the official numbers. So rather than thinking about big data sort of replacing our traditional sources, I prefer to think of them sitting alongside and complementing each other. So we've recently released a research report that contains some experimental CPI indices based on our web scrape data. We've put, there's lots of caveats around their uses, but we want to kind of have an open and transparent approach, have an illustration of what's possible with these big data sources. So the title of my presentation was, is big data being a big change for official statistics? Well, yes, I think it is. I hope I've illustrated that there's a lot of potential for big data to improve the quality of official statistics. There are challenges. I haven't even touched upon all the ethical, commercial and technological challenges. And there are statistical challenges, like I've illustrated, but I hope I've also shown that we're starting to understand how we manage those challenges so we can really realise the benefits. And finally, just if you want to know more, my team does have a page on the ONS website and an email address, and that's my Twitter account if you want to follow what we've been up to. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Jane. Are there questions out there anywhere? There must be one question.
Into silence.
Well, I'll get there. Oh, go ahead. Oh, good.
Well, you mentioned big data that's out there on the web, but I mean there's lots of data sloshing around within government itself, and it's variable quality. But have you thought about looking at things from people like DWP or what have you?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, the primary focus when our project was set up was to look at new data sources, but what became apparent is it isn't just about the data, it's about all these new methods and technologies and actually what that opens up in terms of data that we already hold. So yeah, we are looking back, and also other government departments are, DWB have their own kind of projects looking at big data, and their focus, to be honest, is more on how they can apply these analytic approaches to the data they already hold, particularly sort of vast amounts of data. Yeah.
Another question here?
You mentioned several times about the issues, and the iPhone example was a very good one. Are governments generally cautious with their adoption of new data sources?
It's definitely challenging, particularly for official statistics, where the premise is around knowing the quality of the data. So that's why my kind of thought on it is that it isn't about stopping doing surveys and censuses and replacing them all with these new data sources, but it's actually about trying to combine the best of both worlds. I kind of think about it that at the moment we're in a world where we kind of rely on our traditional surveys, and then we use data sources like admin data, potentially new alternative data sources, as benchmarks or to kind of improve the quality of them. And I think over time we might see a shift where we're using the admin data and the big data as the primary source, but maybe the surveys to do that benchmarking and collaboration. So I kind of see it as a shift, but not a total kind of replacing one for the other.
Another question in the back here.
Do you think the public is very aware that the kind of information that they give out through Twitter and maybe through their mobile phone provider is going to be collected and potentially used by government sources for different purposes? And if they are aware, do you think that affects how free people feel to give that kind of information out?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, part of our project has been around looking at all the ethical and the privacy issues, and particularly on the Twitter is a really good example where the data we're using is public, it's from the API, but actually do people know that if they've got the geolocation switched on, that you can, harvest all of those tweets, including the content as well. So within the project we've been engaging with privacy groups, and we have an ethical committee set up, and we're also planning to do some work with public, for example focus groups, to try and understand what people understand about how government are using the data. It's a really important issue.
Any others out there? Okay, if not, I think we'll move on. So let's just thank Jane again.